I want to start this review with my true opinion on the game. I like it. I like the game because it's a Pokemon game and I like those. I feel like it's common for internet reviews like these to get caught up in being overly negative, and often when that happens it's impossible to tell whether or not the person reviewing it actually likes what they're talking about or just passionately hates it. I like it. That doesn't mean the game doesn't have issues, but it does mean you know that this game isn't irredeemable or the nail in the coffin for the Pokemon company. I just think it could have done more. With that, on with the review. Pokemon had a problem. Game Freak knew that a lot of their fans hated Sword and Shield. Pokemon got the most criticism it has ever gotten in the modern era, and more harsh criticism was and is being leveled on them more than ever because of these games. On top of that, the next games up on the docket to remake were Sinnoh, some of the most beloved games they'd ever made. If they ruined Sinnoh, they knew they would burn some of their core fan base so badly they wouldn't come back for the next game. People wanted Sword and Shield to reach beyond what it was? Fine, we'll do that with Legends Arceus. Imagining Sinnoh but open already fundamentally changes the game, so why not make it the most open world Pokemon has ever gotten, with a unique story, all based around the Sinnoh region? Great. But they knew people would be disappointed with the lack of a close to the chest, faithful remake. So they had someone else make one while they simultaneously developed Legends Arceus. This game is a game of compromise, and it all starts with faithfulness to the originals. These games were intended to be faithful and were marketed as such. However, their dedication to this faithfulness is what kneecapped and confused this game's identity, leading these games overall to be aggressively lukewarm. My playthrough of Brilliant Diamond started with waiting. I turned the game on and there was no startup screen, it just kicked me to Professor Rowan. So once I got out of my house in Twinleaf, I saved and reset the game. That greeted me with the startup screen, which I watched to its completion. Then I dealt with Barry and got my starter, which only after the battle I discovered was a terrible nature. I reset the game to get me back to Twinleaf, but this is where I discovered this game had autosaved, and locked me out of meeting my best friend. Instead of living and loving my partner as it was, I went into data management on the Switch and deleted Brilliant Diamond save data. Then I listened to the professor, Barry, the report for Red Gyarados, and Barry again before turning off the autosave and saving in front of the forest. Because it locks you into a 2-minute long cutscene before you get your starter. I actually did that cutscene 3 times over to get a nature that didn't lower any of Torterra's good base stats. I'm not blaming the game for my experience, I'm just recording it. This experience isn't necessarily unique to Brilliant Diamond, it's a result of Pokemon's endurance as a franchise. Let's say I was playing Heart Gold Soul Silver. I wouldn't have to wait through the cutscene because resetting for a starter in that game's hella quick. Hell, Gold and Silver. Now natures don't exist to begin with, so I don't have to worry about the nature altogether. Do you see what I mean? The more Pokemon goes on, the more features it adds, and they compound and compound until the experience becomes more bogged down and complicated than it was in some ways. Despite this experience's divorce from the game itself, the experience rang a familiar tone with my experiences with Sinnoh in the past. This game is primarily concerned with recreating the Sinnoh experience, but polishing down the rough edges that your nostalgia, or memory, buffs out for you. The route to that is often through ease of play features. Ease of play, in my mind, is all about removing restraints to make the experience more breezy. These restraints often remove difficulty in something like an RPG because so many of the difficulty spots come from tedious things. You don't have the right Pokemon for an area? You have to walk back. Not in this game though, the PC's on your back. This makes the game a little bit easier, but I argue it's worth it because of the design goals of the game in general. So being able to switch between them more frequently makes the game more fun and serves the game's core ideas. An in-game example of this ease of play is a new Pokédex. Here, HMs from the original Diamond and Pearl are selectable from my menu. Now, this is an outstanding addition, because the problem that Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum all share is the abundance of HMs required to make it through the game. This inhibits the Pokemon you use even further than the original Diamond and Pearl already do, ensuring that you have a Flyer, someone to Surf, someone to Strength, etc. These HMs are distributed so you basically need to have one at a Pokemon at all times, and it's such a number that one Pokemon can't even hold them all. This means you're either using up one of your best friend's move slots with moves that you don't care about, or bringing in a whole new Pokemon that you don't care about. By adding this feature in, difficulty is removed, technically, because more moves are available to the player to be used for any purpose they require for battle, not for outside of it. This doesn't really work though, because the Pokédex clearly was not designed to work without a second screen, as the DS had. I originally didn't even notice when I'd been given the Pokédex, with R being the winner of the myriad of random buttons to be the Pokédex's specified action button. Press R to bring out the Pokédex. Press R again to enlarge the Pokédex. Hold R to put it away. It literally feels like you're lugging in an old computer from 2006 and trying to fit it into this 2021 game. There's like 15 apps on the thing, and you have to press the button to change between them. And don't get caught on the counter screen for God's sake, because then you have to wait a beat to press the button again, so you'll be stuck on the page for extra long. I will die in the seconds it takes for the counter to stop counting. Here's an idea. Maybe use one of the 3 other triggers that go wholly unused in this game to operate this unholy thing. Maybe ZR opens a menu of all the available apps and you can simply press them when you want to use. You can have a favorite app that you don't have to press ZL to use. Maybe L closes the app. Is any of this done? No, that wouldn't be faithful to the original game's vision of pressing the button a lot of times, so pressing the button it is. Never mind the fact that the DS's interface worked infinitely better for all the Poketch's applications, and the Poketch was basically designed around the DS as a machine. I literally never used it as a machine, opting to just walk around blindly and press A because of how incongruous mousing around in the Poketch and the actual in-world walking are together. In ORAS, head goggles stepped in for the original dowsing machine, but that wasn't a faithful remake, was it? This is. Never mind the fact that a system like that would have worked so much better in this format. I don't want to take away from the fact that this HM feature is incredibly helpful. So helpful in fact, this game could probably be the definitive way to play through Sinnoh simply because you don't need HMs to get through the game anymore. However, this game often can't decide whether or not it wants to be breezy or serve some difficulty to the player using the currency of the RPG, tedium. For example, breakable TMs. In Generation 5, which came out 12 years ago, TMs were made infinitely reusable after collection. Even in remakes like Omega Ruby, TMs stayed reusable. In Brilliant Diamond, however, TMs can break again. This means you need to be more cautious about which moves you give your Pokemon, as you might want to give something to another Pokemon later. However, there was a reason this change was made to begin with. TMs being reusable is a change along the exact same lines as the PEC box link. It encourages the use of multiple Pokemon by allowing them to quickly get up to speed with the other Pokemon in your party. By making them limited, even if multiples are given out during gym battles, you're encouraged to give TMs to Pokemon you're sure you will use forever, which narrows the scope of Pokemon you are willing to try out. This also makes the post-game harder to deal with, as new Pokemon will not get these new moves as easily. Now this is offset by being able to buy more useful TMs at the department store, but some TMs are never able to be obtained again after they're used up. This technically does increase the difficulty, but many of the other quality of life improvements they make also sacrifice difficulty, so why stick to the original here? I suspect it's in the pursuit of faithfulness. It's incredibly strange that even though this game is labeled as faithful, something like the Grand Underground exists. That completely goes against the idea of this just being prettier Diamond and Pearl. There are so many items in Pokemon you would want or need in the Grand Underground that's difficult to ignore altogether. With that being said, I really wish they had overhauled the mining system in this game because the mining minigame really isn't fun. It just becomes a frustrating thing that you're obligated to do because shiny thing on screen. It makes the traversal of the underground an unfun slog. Imagine if every AAA video game that had trinkets to collect had them constantly respawning, obligating the player to run back to the places they had already traveled to pick them up again. And the chest was never guarded by a minion or a new puzzle every time. It was always the same boring, too long puzzle. Then your reward was more often than not something that was pretty useless, but you could trade multiple of to get something less useless, maybe, on a special day, but you would have to run and find this random trader because they could be in any part of the map. It feels almost unnecessary to say that that would be unacceptably tedious. The problem was magnified for me because I had so many Pokemon on my team to make the game harder for myself. So I was in constant need of evolutionary stones and was encouraged to mine. Also, there's no easier way to get stones in this game because of the arbitrary stop and start of the ease of play. You get fossils, legendary Pokemon MacGuffins, and rare Pokemon in the Grand Underground, so the hardcore Sinnoh fan will have a hard time ignoring it. Now, as I said at the beginning, ease of play is all about removing restraints for a more breezy experience. In this case, these restraints are often some tedious aspect of the game that, when removed, ends up making the game easier, even if by a small fraction. Breakable TMs make the game harder, where reusable ones make the game easier. Poketch HMs make the game easier, where Pokemon HMs make the game harder. The problems with emphasizing ease of play in Pokemon are manifold, however. I'll start with the issue of difficulty. Pokemon is an RPG. RPGs are built on an economy of tedium. Grinding is not difficult, but the game treats it as the currency you can trade for easier battles. In this way, the game encourages you to go through something tedious if you don't have enough skill to do the battle normally. And many RPGs eventually succumb to expecting you to grind to make the very difficult battles possible. That being said, is there really value in grinding for a Pokemon to be good? I think there is, even if only a little. It makes your victory feel earned. Because grinding isn't fun, they effectively got rid of it in two main ways, with the obvious one being the new EXP share system. This invention, which cannot be turned off, shares EXP evenly among all your party members. This ensures no grinding has to be done, but its absence is felt because now it feels like you don't have to try to win. Now that even the most inexperienced player doesn't have to grind to win, the game has leveled the playing field entirely, not valuing or rewarding gaining skill or grinding monsters. There's also a point to be made about my experience with the Pokemon series. I played these games my whole life, and I'm an adult at this point. I've used 12 Pokemon, double the amount traditionally in the party, partly to increase the difficulty and the fun. This way, experience will be diffused more mildly among the party members. If I stuck to 6 Pokemon throughout the game, I suspect it would have been a cakewalk, but this isn't bad in itself. My perspective on Pokemon's ease has shifted a bit to you being expected to change the experience for yourself if you're a grown adult still playing these games. I know people are upset with the lack of a difficulty function, but honestly the fact that Pokemon is a game that's so heavily customizable allows you to choose the level of difficulty there. Also, my using more than 6 Pokemon throughout my journey modulates my difficulty as well. Nevertheless, the game was still easy for me using 12 mods. The second way they got rid of grinding, being the more hidden but more voluminous of the two, is the Grand Underground. Let me tell you a story. I was at the 7th gym in the game, pretty dang close to the end. but I didn't have any electric type Pokemon, and I wanted one to more effectively deal with flying types. So I popped in and ran in and out of the room where I knew they spawned until one did. I chucked a quick ball at it and brought it up to the surface. I walked into the gym and got into a battle with the gym trainer. For context, Elekid is a baby Pokemon, a class of Pokemon defined by their weakness with a base stat total of 360. Nevertheless, when I chucked that out in front of the trainer, my Elekid tore through the gym trainer's Pokemon like a wet paper towel. In fact, it was already stronger than some of the Pokemon I had in my party. You see, my Elekid was special. It already had a perfect elemental move to counter the Ice Step Gym and Fire Punch. Normally, Elekid doesn't just get Fire Punch, it's an egg move. I would have had to breed for it, which is a huge hassle. Why did I have an egg move? Because the Grand Underground just gives egg moves to Pokemon randomly. I also had low kick by virtue of being an Elekid that was this high level, so both the Sneasel and Snover that were in the gym were 4 times weak to one of my moves. How high level, you ask? I caught this baby Pokemon at level 41. This is 1 level shy of the gym leader's ace. The Pokemon series is traditionally idolized the bond between a trainer and Pokemon, and here it's clear I didn't need one. But it's not as if the game isn't aware of this problem. It attempts to address it with the affection system. With this system, your Pokemon will dodge around random moves, break through status conditions, live on 1 health, score additional critical hits, etc. Every time. And that's about 2 seconds to the beginning of every random battle. This adds up. I will die one day, in the seconds it takes for me to know that my Torterra is reassured by my familiar scent. Also, it'll hop around and profess its love to you before the battle. This, ironically, disincentivizes you from having a bond with your Pokemon. In this game, we're still struggling under the effect of the change of the affection system from Sword and Shield, where it was merged with Friendship. However, it almost feels less cheap when your Pokemon don't love you because of it. This is because now, your new Pokemon will have to win on its own merit, and in this Elekid's case, its own merit is really good. That's the problem with replacing an EXP gap with an affection gap. You don't need affection to win battles, but you do need experience. That means in the language of the game itself, you don't need to bond with a Pokemon to win a fight, you just need to pluck a strong one. All that flavor text about wild Pokemon being weaker and wanting to be with trainers was wrong. Experience elegantly puts together bond and strength without missing a beat. But here we miss that by tying the bond of a Pokemon to things that only help in specific situations. Even here affection misses though, because it's too strong in these specific situations to feel fair, especially when you as the player didn't do anything particular to earn it. When affection pops, it doesn't feel like you won, it feels like you cheated. You know what it's like? It's like getting an achievement for bonding with your Pokemon, like an Xbox achievement. Like, you should intrinsically want to bond with your Pokemon, and that's your reward, but now they're giving you extrinsic rewards outside of it, and it just kind of cheapens the whole experience. In the previous games, a Pokemon caught in the wild would always lag a little behind a Pokemon already in your party, which worked very well as a facsimile for them being an outsider to your party when caught. Them battling with you and gaining experience also served as them getting closer to your team and you bonding with that particular Pokemon, but the Grand Underground sacrifices this in the name of convenience and intrigue, with something similar being done in the wild area of Sword and Shield. There, however, some particularly high level Pokemon were not allowed to be caught. Here the levels are kept about even with your team, so you're allowed to catch them, but that effectively removes the actual in-game merit of the time you spent with your party Pokemon, as it says this Pokemon you just caught is just as experienced at battling with you as your best friends are. If you want to look around, maybe go to the water route beneath Sandgem Town or go check out Fuego Ironworks. It's clear the game wasn't designed around that, as it boosts your already inflated levels further than they should go. It's almost like these locations were left in the game because they needed to be faithful, not because they wanted exploration to be available to the player. It's good for ease of play that you don't have to grind up Pokemon, you could just toss them in your party. However, if there's no option for the EXP share to be turned off, I'd like to see increased difficulty in the game to counterbalance this. That's where this faithfulness stops them again, given that only so much can be done to make these games more difficult. You can see there is an attempt to do so with the gym leader's improved items and movesets from the original game. The fact that this problem could not effectively be fixed, despite the increased difficulty of the important trainers, shows how detrimental the Grand Underground's levels are to the overall experience. Speaking of the Grand Underground, they've made another step towards this game's potential ease of play by allowing you to catch more difficult Pokemon to obtain, or in some cases, unobtainable Pokemon in the originals, in this location. Pokemon like Togepi that were only attainable in Platinum through Cynthia's egg, now just walk in the Underground. But they don't go all the way with it, and just include more Pokemon that are unavailable in this game and only in Platinum, like Eevee for instance. If they want to emphasize ease of play, I want to see more Pokemon like this available to me in the Grand Underground during the main story. The truth is, Diamond and Pearl are some of my least favorite Pokemon games to begin with. The reason I dislike those games so much is because of the lack of availability of the Pokemon they made, barring the player from accessing them until the post-game. Why am I not allowed to catch a Yanma until Cynthia? No Eevee, no Electivire, no Porygon Z? Why'd you make these cool new Pokemon to prevent me from catching them? Did you know Tangrowth just isn't in the game? Just isn't in the game. It's just not in the game. They forgot to put Tangrowth in. I legitimately think they forgot to put in Tangrowth. There's an event to get him in Diamond and Pearl, and the event's only in South Korea, and it was after Platinum already came out, so there was literally nothing you're getting out of it. So they just didn't put Tangrowth in the game. Why? Why did they? Why? This game doesn't have that problem to the same extent, but it has to have some of it because 1. They need you to consider these games faithful remakes and thus some cool Pokemon have to be gated off, and 2. It wants to give its post-game some value given that they're purposefully not including the Battle Frontier because these games are trying to be faithful. You see how the faithfulness problem pervades the entire game? Rotom can't be in the Grand Underground because then it's not faithful to the original, and as a result you don't care about going to the old chateau at all. But if they just put it in as Platinum did, the Rotom would be perfectly positioned to help you in your journey, as it's level 15. As it is, it's a bit of post-game content in a Pokemon that's woefully underleveled for where you're at currently. Something similar is done in the Johto games, where several Pokemon are left until after the Pokemon League to be obtainable, including a new pseudo-legendary, Larvitar, as well as Misdreavus, Houndour, and Murkrow among others. Those latter two are Dark type, which is an entirely new type in Generation 2. One that you, might want to experience in a new game you just bought. Nope, you gotta wait. In Johto, however, it can be argued that the game is but half of itself with Kanto, relying on Kanto for its other half. Johto only has a regional bird if it's nighttime. If it's daytime, it's Pidgey. In Sinnoh, the same is done, but without the benefits of gaining another region from it. Relying on previous games to fill out its regional decks while also relying on evolutions to get its Pokemon total up to 107. Still less than the previous game's 135. Now, this leads to a question. Well, if so many problems arise from this game's lack of post-game content and its lack of available Pokemon, why didn't they just make 2 Platinums? Didn't that 13-year-old game fix both of these issues very nicely? Pokemon Platinum is considered by the fans to be a better version of Diamond and Pearl, but if that's the case, then why are the remakes trying to emulate the game that came before it? I argue it's because the developers do not consider the third version as the definitive version of the region. Platinum is not the game that represents Sinnoh, Diamond and Pearl are. Looking at the original games, the third version was always supposed to exist within the context of the other ones, not as a standalone definitive version of the region. One thing you notice when you look at all the promotional material for these games is they avoid words like best and definitive like the plague. You might be able to find extended or expanded or even enhanced if you turn over every rock, but best? No way. Looking at Sinnoh, Platinum misses the Murkrow and Glameow lines. Why? So you have to trade with Diamond or Pearl. Emerald, Crystal, Yellow, they all do this. Now, excluding Tangrowth, which is literally the only normal Pokemon ever to not be obtainable in either version, it is definitely a mistake. The 2 original games allow one to capture all the Sinnoh Pokemon that Platinum does, just in more inconvenient spots in the game. That leads to the conclusion that the developers intended for these Pokemon to be hard to access, as a sort of reward for completing the game, while padding out the end of the game with additional post-game content. Platinum eliminates that additional challenge to complete the decks, and replaces the post-game content with more interesting battle content, which is more fulfilling to the returning player, but it could be argued that this is only done because the returning player is expected to know about these new Pokemon already. The new, unspoiled player, which you could be going into Diamond and Pearl, would actually be surprised upon Ryama's evolution into Yon Mega. It isn't that it was a mistake that this game locks the interesting new Pokemon it created behind the Pokemon League, that they correct in Platinum. They were intended to be absent in Diamond and Pearl to begin with, and Platinum allows you to use these Pokemon early as a sort of fan service. This means additional Pokemon from other regions that you're allowed to use are also fan service, allowing the player to use more Pokemon for their Sinnoh journey than the originals envisioned. Pokemon Yellow is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. An enhanced version of the original Red and Blue, it pushes aside the original game's vision to serve what the fans want, following the plot of the increasingly popular anime series. The third versions even have the roots in non-canon fan service-like stories. Pokemon Yellow is just an anime story retold through a game. You don't like only having to choose one starter? Now you get all 3. You want to start with Pikachu like Ash did? Now you can. Is having 3 starters a fun way to play through Kanto? Sure, but is it the way the game developers wanted you to? No. To begin with, being able to use all 3 starters unbalances the rest of Kanto, because it disincentivizes you from using other Kanto Pokemon to cover those types. Using Blastoise means you don't need a Cloyster or a Slowbro or a Starmie, and water Pokemon like that take up a lot of Kanto's decks. Importantly, the reason it's cool to use all 3 starters in the first place is because of the starter's rarity that was imposed by the original games. This game does not exist in its own context. Let's look at this new outlook more holistically. If the developers intended for these changes, then what else do we consider corrected in Platinum that was actually intended by the game developers as part of the game's identity? An often lampooned aspect of the original Sinnoh games is their speed. In Platinum, the game is sped up significantly, but this change may have been more indulgent than corrective. It could be argued that the original games had a slow pace intentionally. Compare Littleroot Town's music to Twinleaf's Town music, and you'll see what I mean. If you'll indulge in a little music analysis, the BPM is literally faster in Littleroot Town. It's as if the game is inviting you to new beginnings, which makes sense given your character just moved to this town. All beginning towns sound a little bit sad, and this one is no different. It's saying you have to go off on an adventure, but you would do well to come back and visit your mom every once in a while. Twinleaf Town, though, is unique among starting towns, as it isn't nearly as plucky as all the others. It's both similar to the remade New Bark Town for Heart Gold and Soul Silver. In contrast to Littleroot, this seems reminiscent of something standing still for a long, long time. But it's beginning to change, and you are the emissary of that change. Change isn't something anyone easily invites. but it's something that you have to do if you're meant to fulfill what you're meant to do. If you don't hear any of that in any of these songs, forgive me. Back to hard-hitting heuristics, text speed and your initial walk speed are slower than they've ever been. The reason patience indicates the developer's cognizance of the desire to blaze through this game, and their gentle nudge to slowly take in the game. In places like Eterna, the elders will mention their age in contrast to the protagonist's newness, inviting them to take in the world slowly while they can. Snow and mud were environmental obstacles that, while enriching the world, literally slowed down the player more than ever before. With that said, catching a Pokemon like Munchlax this easy in this game is a complete betrayal of the original game's themes, but one I would happily accept if the rest of the game's quality of life features actually kept up with it. While the game may have been slower, the beauty of the world was higher than it had ever been. Maybe the player should enjoy the sights and sounds of the Sinnoh region slowly. Because this is a faithful remake, it's obvious they will try to recreate the core identity of the original games as best they can. Now what could Sinnoh's identity be within the Pokemon series itself? It sure as hell like the gameplay, I'll tell you that. Sorry. It's the ability to play with your friends online easily, thus the easy to access Union Room. It's Cynthia and her difficulty, which tracks given the marked difficulty increase at the Elite Four in this game. But more than anything, I've noticed is their presentation. I believe more than any other region, fans have distinctive memories tied to the sights and sounds of Sinnoh, and this game tries to bottle and recreate that more than anything. There's evidence in the titles, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, both emphasizing the lustrous appearance of these stones, not the cut itself. Looking at the music, it's incredibly apparent that a lot of care was put into it. They nail the soundtrack in this game. In fact, I feel like it's the one thing they do nail. At their worst, they're equally as good, and at their best, they far surpass the original. The farther we move from the pixel art style, the more games like Platinum are fondly remembered for their bright, lively sprite art. It's important to consider the context when looking at this aspect of the game. These games were simultaneously developed by a separate studio while Game Freak worked on Legends Arceus. It was marketed as a faithful remake, while Legends Arceus clearly takes up the less faithful route of remaking Sinnoh. I feel like this art style choice was calculated. Making the game all sprites would technically downgrade the people from what they originally were in the towns. Sinnoh's a huge pet reason for fans, so they strayed as little as they could from the original art style while sticking to a 3D style and still being considered a remake. Thus, Gumby. That being said, technical issues hamper the presentation more than it needs to be. Following Pokemon is a particular problem area. Was the Pokemon just sliding along behind you? Even without that, this style of following Pokemon is much weaker than in Let's Go. This is more akin to the following Pokemon that appeared in Sword and Shield, the infinitely worse kind where the Pokemon trailed 50 feet behind you and teleported to catch up. Why is there a grid system in this game if they couldn't use it for following Pokemon? And when my Grotto got out in Amity Square and started walking around like that, I immediately googled how to make Pokemon follow you faster. Did I really believe that Pokemon could follow you faster? No. But I just want to believe that one of the 3 starter Pokemon wouldn't follow you that slowly forever. I'll tell you, the search results disappointed me. An interesting aesthetic difference between these games and the original is now you can pick between 4 different colors of bicycle. I agonized over what color I wanted it to be for like an hour, just to be unhappy with it. Moreover, I barely use the bicycle because running feels faster and more accurate than 3rd gear. 4th gear I seldom use when I was frustrated with how slowly I was getting to an area, probably because of how the random encounters are presented in this game. This isn't even speaking about the increased frequency of them as compared to Sword and Shield. It is a little annoying, but I can live with it in the name of faithfulness. What I can't live with is how your character will just stand in place for like 2 seconds before the wild screen even pops up. And it's a weak one at that. In my opinion, there should have been more cool screen effects like there were in the previous games, that hid loading a bit better. In an effort to make these games faster, they actually made it slower and uglier by making the wild screen the same. I say, cut out the walking up to the grass scene that's been in other games, and leave in a screen transition, instead of the other way around like this game opted for. Talking about how this game looks in battle is a completely different story though. The Pokemon's movements between actions and battle are exactly the little touches I love in these games. Their trainers before and after battle look great as well, and their little animations have a lot of personality. The backgrounds look beautiful in battle, with a marked increase in variety for most Pokemon games. The towns look good enough, recreated so faithfully it feels like you're a figure in a Lego set. Scratch that, maybe a Duplo set. The water looks pretty good, especially when looked at from a distance. When you're surfing it though, Beeper kind of glides over the water when you start looking at it for too long. It also kind of drowns when you get off of it. I can't be mad at the trail that comes behind you though. It's a weird but nice touch. I prefer playing these games during the evening because the sunsets look nice. Nighttime is markedly more boring. Stuff like that makes me want an accelerated day-night cycle, as I said before, but you know that ain't faithful. The real problem comes when you meet any story-important character. They look so strange but presented to you, with swollen balloon heads. Cyrus is a particularly grievous offender, with no eyebrows and drawn-on jawbones. The fact is, the heads are huge in the original too, it's just that the chibi style works best when scaled down to the DS's level. Something that really bothered me was the low contrast on this game, which brings to mind more problems I have with Sinnoh's decks, which is that all the Pokemon's designs kind of blend together for me. And Let's Go, issues like that are fixed, but the colors on the Pokemon feel washed out here again. Not vibrant, and that hampers my experience incredibly when I'm trying to build a team that I love. The difference between a Clefable and Let's Go and one here is glaring in my opinion. And this is indirectly the reason I trained so many up, because I was unhappy with how most looked. Just as a little side note, how many Sinnoh Pokemon are brown, blue, or yellow? I swear, like every Sinnoh Pokemon has brown, blue, or yellow as one of its major colors. Then everyone uses the same team in Sinnoh, so it compounds. Infernape, Gastrodon, Roserade, Staraptor, Luxray, Garchomp, that's 6 off the top of my head. I looked into this a little bit. There are 50 Sinnoh Pokemon that are brown, blue, or yellow according to the Pokédex's categorization of like the color of a Pokemon. Our control Alola, including regional variants for an incredibly similar Pokemon total of 106, reached 39 Pokemon like this. And one final aesthetic update, you can change the skin tone of the starting character to whatever you want at the beginning of the game. However, you can't change their hair, and the clothes you can change to are incredibly restrictive, making me wonder if I should have forgone faithfulness to myself and just tried to roleplay the player character in Diamond instead. And there's the real kicker. This character model is a perfect summation of this entire game. I stared at this character model the same way Game Freak and Ilka approached creating this remake. I thought, instead of making the experience as good as it possibly could be, I should be faithful to the original game's character models, to face any possible awkwardness my skin tone brought to the game. Once you make a game on a mission statement of pleasing a particular section of your audience and pleasing tradition, you already have a problem. This game is a faithful remake where some things are improved from the originals, while other things are left to rot on the proverbial bone of this game's originality. They didn't allocate many resources to this game for a reason. They wanted the game to be fine for what it was, and that's what it is.